Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Oh My JavaScript. Today, we explore React Material UI from a beginner's perspective and understand some of its core concepts that include the usage of components, customizations, theming, layout, and lot more. You do not need any prior knowledge in React Material UI as such, but yes, I expect that you have at least a beginner level exposure to React the framework. Our focus today is only going to be React Material UI. Now that said, let's jump right into the content. Let's scaffold a React project first. For that, let's go to reactjs.org documentation. You don't need to by heart anything. All the respective links and the whole source code will be documented in the GitHub repo, and the link to that repo will be shared in the description box below. Let's start by scaffolding npx create React app MUI YouTube demo and once that installation is done, let's cd to the folder and install the Material UI as per their documentation. Let's go to the MUI documentation link and install the Material UI, the associated packages that needs to be installed along with the Material UI. That includes the emotion as well as the styled packages. So once that is installed, let's install the SVG icons as well as add the Roboto font. So let's copy the SVG icons link npm install at MUI/icons-material. Once that is installed, let's take the Roboto font here, move towards index.html, and right below the title, let's add the Roboto font. So by the time the installation here would have been complete. So once that is done, let's run npm start and once it spins up the Webpack server, let's open up localhost 3000 and our React application would be up. So once that's done, let's move to the coding window, the IDE. Here I've already installed a plugin called ES7 plus React Redux React Native Snippets from the extensions marketplace, which will help us scaffold React components pretty quickly. It gives us a bunch of shortcuts. That's all. So once that is done, let's move to the src folder and create a components folder, and within which let me create a dummy component with the name dummy.js. And once that is created, let me use RAFCE, the shortcut provided by the plugin, to scaffold a dummy React component. And let's add some React Material UI components into it. Jumping back to the Material UI documentation. Now, the aim of this video is not to go through every single component that the library offers. That would pretty much be a repetition. But to go through the essential ones, understand the pattern, and use the documentation as a reference to get the things we need. Now, there is a lot in terms of documentations. So let's go to the components. So let's start simple by adding a React Material UI button. So if you go to the documentation here, let's find the documentation of a button. If you click the code, it shows up the code that we need to use to get a button. Now it's not just a button here, but there is something called a stack, which I'll come to a bit later once we talk about stacks and grids together. So let's take this code. Let's take the imports here. Go back. Use the imports. Let's take the stack and the button together. Let's paste the button here. Now all it means is in React Material UI, every single component comes from its own module. So whatever we import, that needs to be imported separately. The stack, the button, the components, the grids, the layouts, whatever it is, it needs to be imported from its respective namespaces. So under MUI Material Stack, you will find the stack component. Under MUI Material Button, you find the button component. Stack is a container, and it's a one-dimensional container within which we have something called a button component, which accepts a bunch of properties. Now you cannot byheart all the properties of all the components. So the best thing would be go to the documentation, come down to the API section. Here, if you click the button, it will show the respective props that this component can accept as well as the CSS. So rather than byhearting, it would be much more easier and simpler just to open up this documentation and see what all are the properties that you can supply to this particular component. So that said, let's take this component. Let's go to app.js. Let's clear up everything we don't want. And let's use import the respective component. I don't need the logos. Let's get rid of logo. And here I'm using the dummy component. So once that is done, let's head back to the localhost and see that there is indeed the button components displayed from the React Material UI. So that confirms our installation is a success. The pattern of using Material UI components are pretty much the same throughout. Import the component. Look at the API documentation to know the properties as well as its corresponding values as well as events that it accepts, and use it as the library mentions. There is no magic. Now there are 50 plus components, if not 60 components. So going through each one of them would be highly repetitive and boring. So instead of going through the entire set, I'm picking and choosing some of the interesting, unique ones that helps us to understand Material UI in a bigger picture. Let's start by using a very simple component called box. So box, as the documentation says, is a wrapper component for most of the CSS utility needs. So what that means is that let's import box from the Material UI /material/box namespace. Once we have the component, let's use the component box. This box accepts a property called SX. So this SX props is something which can accept both CSS properties as well as system properties. By system properties, what I mean is Material UI itself provides us a bunch of useful CSS properties which they have. So they have packaged a bunch of properties into system properties. So if you go to Material UI, the box, there is something called SX, and here the documentation leads us to the properties. So here, if you go through the properties, there is a lot of useful properties that they give us for free. And you can either use this one or we can have additional CSS properties as we see fit. To use that, let's have an SX property, and this SX property accepts an object. So this object accepts custom system properties as well as normal CSS properties. So m:10, there is no CSS property called m, but this is a system property which is a shortcut for margin all. So if you go to the component and check, since the m here is mentioned as 10, look at what we have here. So if you inspect the component, we have margin 80, which means m, the value 1 corresponds to 8 pixel. So it goes in multiples of 8, and by default the box renders as a div object with a custom scoped CSS attached to it. So we could use m10. If it is not m, we can use p. So that will be padding 10. So if you inspect here, we've got a padding of 80. So we have custom system properties as well as normal CSS properties like width. This is normal CSS property. So that is what box is all about. The next component that we are going to see is typography, for which we import typography, and for the box to be shown, we add some properties to the box. A max width of 500, m10 means margin all 80px, and a border so that we get to see the border clearly, the box as is. Into the box, we add a component called typography. So typography has got a few properties. So if you look variant, the variant says if you hover over a variant, we get to see all the properties that can be assigned to this prop. So I am saying, if you go to the documentation here, this is how the variants look like. So if you want a bigger font, give it as an H1. If you want a smaller one, give it as an H6. If you want any of these look and feel, provide the corresponding variant. So here I am giving overline. Let's see how overline looks like. And I'm saying it should look like an overline text, but in DOM, it should be rendered as an H1. So if I save it and if I go to the application, it's rendering as an overline, but the component here is H1. Instead, I can do the other way around. I say I need a component of H6, but the variant should look like H1. So if you go back, it renders the component H6 in the DOM, but the look and feel, the variant of that component is that of an H1. So that's how you mix and match the variant and the component to get the look and feel, as well as the component that needs to be rendered to the DOM. Let me show you a few more handy properties for typography. So let me add two properties, gutter bottom as well as no wrap, and let me increase the content here to a bigger one. And when I save it, you see that the moment we put no wrap, the text doesn't wrap, but by default it provides an ellipsis. The moment I take this out and save it, we see that the text starts to wrap to the next line. Gutter bottom is nothing but margin bottom. So if you take a look here, there is a margin bottom, and the moment I take the gutter bottom out, the margin is reset to 0. So that's how you add properties to get the look and feel or the kind of functionalities you want. Go take a look at the props provided by the typography for a complete list of options. I've just shown you a few of handful properties out of this entire list. So that's it for typography. The next two properties in our list is container as well as CSS Baseline. So let's see each one of them. Let's import the container from the container namespace, and let's use the container and see what happens. So all I said here is, hey container, if you take a look at the properties of the container, there is something called max width. The max width points to each breakpoint from XS, SM, MD, LG, XL, something corresponding to something like a bootstrap breakpoints. We can customize the breakpoints if we want, but that's something that we'll do in another video. So here I said, let the background be something of a light blue color and let the height be 100 view height. So that's how the height of this container is. And I said the max width is LG. So XS corresponds to 0 or extra small, SM corresponds to 600, MD corresponds to 900, LG corresponds to 1200. So I said let the width of the container be a max of 1200. So if I inspect and take the breakpoints, anything over 1200, this container will go only till 1200. Anything under, it's responsive. So the moment I go above whatever which is mentioned here, then it stays. So instead of LG, if I am putting MD, I said MD is for 900. So till 900, it's responsive, and after 900, it holds the value. So the moment I hit 900, anything above, it holds a max width of 900. Similarly for 600 and XS. The difference is that if I put fixed instead of a max width, see what happens. Now this 1000 falls between MD and LG, right? So in between 900 and 1200, which is the lowest breakpoint, it's 900. So this holds till 900, and the moment I go above 1200, it switches to 1200. So the moment I hit 1300, it switches to the next available breakpoint. So the closest breakpoint to 1300 is 1200, which is LG. So the width switches to LG. The moment I come down 1900, no, 1200, a pixel below that, it switches to the closest breakpoint, which is 900. It keeps that value till 900. The moment I go 899, that's when it switches to the next available breakpoint, which is 600. And the moment I hit 599, that's when it becomes completely responsive of 100%. So that's how the fixed versus max width works here. Another property which I wanted to show you is CSS Baseline. Now, if you have ever worked with normalized CSS or reset CSS in other frameworks, this is something similar. So let's look at the value here. Let's open up the style value here. Look here. As of now, I have not introduced CSS Baseline here. So the element value, there is nothing else here. The moment I put CSS Baseline, see what happens. The moment I save it, it comes with its own set of default values. So all the CSS resets for margin, for padding, for table, box sizing, border box, it comes with a default set of value packed into it. So the moment we use this component, preferably at the base of the application, it resets the whole application so that margin, padding, everything is normalized and works across a variety of browsers. So that is CSS Baseline and container for you. In this section, we'll see material UI grids as well as the material UI cards. The material UI grids is built using CSS Flexbox under the hood. So let's see how it works. Let's make it a bit more interesting. As of now, each item occupies 4 columns each. So of 12 columns, each is having 4. So 1/3, 1/3 and 1/3 is the size. No matter what the width of the outer container is. Let's make it responsive so that on each breakpoint, let's have a different column width. So let's go here and say on XS, it should occupy, the item should occupy 6 columns. On SM, let it be 4. On LG, let it be 3. So the moment we go to the smaller size, let it be 2. So we say XS is 6. So 6 each, 6 is 12. So 6 plus 6. The moment we go towards the SM, it switched to 3. So 3, 3, 3 make it 12. And on the LG breakpoint, it switched to 3. So 3, 3, 3, 3 makes it 4 into 3, 12. So we made it responsive on individual breakpoints. If we need to customize the spacing, we could do something like this. We go to the container and say the row spacing is 2, the column spacing is, so as and when the breakpoint changes, please change the column spacing. So let's see how that affects the grid. So at smaller breakpoints, XS, the space is 2. So if you check the padding of individual items, it should be, the space should be 16. Whereas if we move towards the SM, it's double of that. So the padding is 32. The moment we hit LG, it should be 64. So 64 indeed. So that's how we can configure the column spacing as well as the row spacing if we wish to. The next component in our list is stack. So as the documentation says, stack is concerned with one-dimensional layout, while grid handles two-dimensional layout. So with respect to stack, all it cares is about its immediate children. You can lay them either vertically or you can lay them either horizontally. So let's see how stack works. Let's import stack along with another component called divider. Let's use stack component. So stack expects few properties, few input properties, two of them being direction as well as orientation. So here I'm saying the direction as row and the orientation as vertical. So the direction is from left to right when we set the option as row, and the moment we switch it back to column with the divider's orientation being horizontal and the orientation be changed as horizontal here, we could see that the layout has switched from left to right to top to bottom. So that exactly is what stack does for us. So if we need to build menus like hamburger menu which switches from a desktop layout to a mobile layout, stack is something which we can use to create such a layout. Next in line is a very fancy component called ImageList. So if you are trying to build list of images for display purpose, gallery purpose, so this is something which you can try it out. Let's import the required components, ImageList and an ImageList item, ImageList being the container and the ImageList item being the individual item that we see here. For the list, we need some data. So let's have an item data array which holds a bunch of photo properties objects. So we have, all we have here is an image and a title. So we have about 10 entries or so. Let's use the ImageList component, and using the SX property that we have in Material UI, I said let the width be 100%, the height should be 530px for the ImageList container. It should show 3 columns. So per row we should have 3 items each, and the height of the row should be 264. So to iterate, we are going to iterate the item data, and for each individual item, let's show an ImageList item with the image pointing to the src, which is mentioned here in the individual object. And one additional property that's cool to look at is lazy. So the moment we provide loading property to lazy, what it does is it will only render those images which are in the viewport. Only when we start scrolling, the additional images starts to load. So let's see how it works. As we have configured, we have 3 items per row. The height of the row is 264. The width of the image list container is 100%. The total height is 530 for the whole container. So let's switch to the network tab. Let's refresh this and let me show you something. So as of now, here we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 photos loaded. That is because there is only 6 photos up here in the viewport at the moment. Let me clear it, and once we start scrolling, the other images would be loaded as and when it comes into the viewport. So that is image list as well as image list item and the loading lazy property for you. Now it's not just one example. If you go through the documentation, there is a lot of variations of this image list and image list item. Showing everything would be just a repetition. So this is more or less a pattern that you could follow. If you could come down, there is a lot of other options like quilted, woven, masonry, which is more or less different variations of image list where you tend to show the image list in a few other ways. So that's the only difference. It do have a property called variant. So for a full list, go check out the API documentation and see what each option does for you. The next 2 components in line is paper as well as modal. Paper is that component in Material UI which is used to create that flat, sleek, clean, modern looking websites with raised box shadow effect. To use paper, as usual, let's import some of the components that we use together. So we have paper, button, box, typography, and the component which we are about to see in this video is modal. So let's have all the imports together. The modal should have some styles. So this is nothing but CSS styles. There is nothing specific about it. It's just a bunch of styles for modal. Paper accepts a property called elevation, which gives us that raised feeling. If you put elevation's value as 0, you will get a flat paper kind of a look, whereas the higher the number, the higher the elevation is. So all I'm saying here is, let me have a container paper with a minimum width of 200. Let there be a margin all of 5, or so 5 into 8, 40 px. Let there be a padding top of 5, which means padding top is 40 px. Let me have a button. So what I want is clicking on this button, I need to pop up the modal. So let's have the on click property, which points to the open modal. I have a React slice of state here using React useState, and I have a couple of methods called open modal and close modal. Upon clicking this button, it triggers the open modal, which calls the setOpen setter to true, so that this open slice property would be true. And in the modal, so the modal component accepts a few properties, one being open. If you set open as true, it will show the modal. If you set open as false, it will hide the modal. And onClose is a callback function which the modal component accepts, so that the moment we click inside the modal, we can handle whatever it returns from there, an event. So within the modal, let's have a box and let's give the style which we had here to this box, so that upon clicking the button, this box would be shown with an overlay. So let's Let's bring in the typography and say, let's have a heading. Hey, are you sure you are about to delete the category? So it's just a set of dummy content. Let's see if it works or not. We have a paper with elevation of 7. So we have a slightly raised paper kind of a feel. We have a button inside. Upon clicking the button, we have that modal layover, the box, and inside the box we have the text as well as the message. So clicking anywhere outside, it closes the modal, because in the modal we have the close modal callback function, and the close modal sets it back to false. So the modal would be closed once we click anywhere outside. In this video, let's talk about theming. I went ahead and created something substantial so that rather than putting a button and just show the toggling between two modes, you get to see theme changes in its entirety. So let me give you a walkthrough of the code. Nothing huge, but a lot of material UI components, and no worries, everything is documented in the GitHub repo. So as usual, in the dummy page, I have a box, grid, list items, icons, typography, navbar, and paper. So the list on the left side that you see comes from this list array. We have the CSS baseline so that our layouts are proper. We have a box. Inside of the box, we have a grid that holds two grids, the left side navlist grid as well as the right side banner. In the navbar, we have the app bar, which is the material UI app bar that you see here. The menu icons, the icons that you see on the side, and the stack which holds the navigation buttons that you see on the top, including the toggle theme button. So that's the setup for us. Now let's introduce theming into this existing setup. To introduce theming, let's create a dedicated folder called context, and let's give it a name, theme context. Theme context.js. So within the theme context.js file, let's import the React first, and using the React, let's create a context by calling react.createContext. Let's name it color mode context, or whichever name you want for the context. The create context method accepts an object, and within this object I'm saying I need one property called mode and one method called toggle color mode to toggle the mode from light to dark and dark to light. So this is the easiest part of creating the theme. Then let's create a folder called container, because what I'm going to create is an app theme provider which wraps the entire app.js file. So essentially that's a container. This is just my convention. This is not a hard and fast rule. So going to the container folder, I'm saying app theme provider.js, and within the file I'm saying RAFCE shortcut. So this scaffolds a React component for me. Now that we have the base, let's start bringing in more components. First, let's import the context which we have created, the color mode context. So I've import color mode context from // one folder behind the context and go to the theme.context. Then we will import two things from the @mui/material/styles namespace. What we have is a create method as well as a theme provider component. So I accept props because I know app theme provider is a wrapper component. So eventually I need to pass props.children somewhere inside the component. Using the react.useState, I create a slice of state. Now what I'm doing here is I'm having the implementation of the interface which we have provided here. So within the context, we have a toggle color mode as well as the mode which I'm implementing here. We have a slice of state called mode which has got a default value. I'm assuming that it should start with a light theme. So I'm providing the initial value as light. I'm creating a method called toggle color mode, which is more or less the implementation of this one. So I said toggle color mode is a function that calls the set mode and toggles the value. If it is light, make it dark, or if it is dark, make it light. Then using the create theme method, we can create a theme. That's how we create themes in Material UI. So create theme accepts an object. So this object has got a property called palette. The palette accepts the mode. Since we have the context created here, I replace the div with the color mode context.provider so that we could create a provider here. The provider accepts a property called value, and within the value we are passing the mode as well as the toggle color mode which we have implemented here. And once that is done, the only thing left is to create a theme provider. So Material UI provides a component called theme provider which needs to be wrapped around the app.js so that themes can be applied throughout the application. So we have the theme provider accepting our theme which we created here into a property called theme. So now that that's done, all we need to do is call props.children, because this app theme provider component is a wrapper over our app.js component. When I save, I got this error because there is a typo here. So I have an extra comma as well as the color mode context is not a default import, rather a named import. So once we change these both, the errors are gone. Now that the app theme provider has been created, let's go to the index.js, import the app theme provider, and instead of the React strict mode, let's wrap the whole application with the app theme provider. So that's where the props.children came into the picture, because this props.children is our application here. And as the last piece to see it working, let's go to navbar.js. Let's import the context and let's use the react.use context to use this context. Let's wire up the buttons on click to call the context.toggle color mode, which was passed down the context. If all is well, let's save the application, and the moment we click the toggle theme button, it indeed toggles between the dark and light theme. So that is the bare basic implementation of theming in Material UI. So if your requirement is not just having a default light theme, dark theme switching, but instead leveraging the already pre-built Material UI themes, then come to the theming section here in the customization. So once you are here, there is in-depth documentation regarding what all can be themed and configured. It's not just the colors and palette, but typography, spacing, breakpoints, transition, customizing the MUI components, everything is possible. So here, let me import few custom themes from the MUI/material/colors. If you need to know more, just put a comma, control space, and at the top you will get to see all the pre-built material themes available for us. So once that's done, let me create a method called getDesignTokens. So this name is up to you. So I'm giving it a name as getDesignTokens, which accepts a mode. So based on the mode, we can switch between a dark theme mode and a light theme mode. So within this method, this accepts an object that contains any of these properties. So you can customize any of these properties by passing it into this object. So here I'm passing the palette, which is mentioned here, and I'm saying whatever the mode I pass into here, just switch to that mode. And correspondingly, I'm saying if the mode is light, show this object, or if the mode is dark, show this object. So we have two sets of themes. So one for the light and one for the dark. And all we need to do here is come down, and instead of passing it the object here, let's call getDesignTokens and pass in the mode. So if the wiring is right, let's go to the application, and we could already see that the light theme of deep orange is already in effect. And if we switch, the deep purple dark theme is also visible. So that is also working fine for us. So if you are more adventurous and you have requirement to have your own custom themes and you need to configure them by hand, come down, and there is a section here called Theme Builder, and there is a link called MUI Theme Creator. If you open that link, you could customize any of these individual properties from here, tune it to your requirements, copy paste the value from here, and instead of these values, copy them here. So that would give you an extremely customized light theme and dark theme. So instead of the themes, what if you need to customize the components itself? So for example, the moment you click this button, there is that ripple effect, right? So if your requirement is that you no longer need the ripple throughout the application and throughout any of the MUI buttons that you are going to use, come down, and just under the palette, you can have the components object, within which I can say I need to configure the MUI buttons default props, disable ripple, and set it to true, so that the ripple disabling is set to true. So once this is set, if I click on any of the MUI buttons, this no longer have the ripple effect. Similarly, there is a list item here, right? So the same thing can be done for the list item too. So just under the MUI button, I could say MUI list item buttons, its default props, and disable ripple if set to true. So this only have a hover, not the ripple effect anymore. For whatever reasons, if you need to use custom media queries within your code, Material UI has got you covered. They have a useMediaQuery method. So if you could import the useMediaQuery from MUI Material useMediaQuery, I could say useMediaQuery and pass in whatever the breakpoint you want to hit. You could do this and say if this condition matches, then only show the menu icon. So as per our condition, on higher breakpoints, we won't be showing the hamburger menu, but only if it hits the 600 and below, the menu icon is shown. So our media query is working in this case. Let's introduce some custom properties within the configuration object and use them within the application. So let's go to the get design tokens, the configuration object. Now I'm going to add a property called custom and give it a random value of a color. Similarly, let's go to the light mode section and also add the background custom with a different color. So right now we have a custom color for dark mode as well as white mode. So to see that, let's go to dummy.js, pick any component where you wish to see it. I'm picking paper, which we already have here. So I said, let the background color be background.custom. So whatever we have provided in background.custom would be shown here. So if we toggle that, right now we have a custom color for the dark theme as well as light theme for paper. So that's it for the React Material UI introduction series. My target was to have something under 1 hour, and I believe we have wrapped up this video series around 45 minutes. I hope you like the content. Let me know your suggestions, thoughts and criticisms in the comment section below. Thank you and bye-bye.